Hello, welcome to this video, the first PS1 Racing Challenge recap. So for those who don't know, I'm currently on a mission to beat every racing game released for the PS1, hence the channel name, and I recently passed the 50 game mark. Well, not so recently now, it's taken me a while to get around to doing this. Anyway, I thought it'd be cool to do a little retrospective of the challenge so far, share a couple of highlights, a couple of stinkers, so let's get on with it. So to start off, best game so far is Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed. It was a close run thing, but a big reason I chose this as best is simply because of how well polished it is. The controls are tight and responsive, graphics are fantastic, has a decent amount of content, and the aesthetics are spot on too. There were two game modes that I decided I had to clear to call the game beaten. The first I did was the factory driver mode. This is a short mission mode with a character-driven story, where basically you're Porsche's new test driver and all your colleagues take their jobs far too seriously. The story is a cheesy bit of fun, the missions have a decent bit of variety, it was a fun hour. The meat of the game is the evolution mode. It's a full career mode divided into 3 sections, or eras. Each era has era-appropriate cars, track aesthetics and music, which is found to be really cool and help bring the game alive. The eras have 3 tournaments that require to be beaten for progression, along with a bunch of optional events, all of which gives money that you can use for better cars and upgrades. My criticisms are minor, but I do have a couple. The AI was a little iffy, a bit inconsistent, I often found the game a bit easy. My other is a little structural one. Basically, when you moved on to the next era in evolution mode, you couldn't go back. This means that if you want to 100% complete it, and I was tempted, you had to 100% each era before moving on, which I found a bit unnecessarily restrictive. No opportunity to go back and clean up the optional challenges. But as a whole, I had a really pleasant, positive time with the game, good fun all round. Next up, we have the worst game of the first 50, and it is MTB Dirt Cross. MTB Dirt Cross is a Japanese mountain bike racing game, and it sucks. The controls are awful, the steering in particular has a progressiveness that makes accurate steering an impossibility. Basically, initial steering input will have little effect, keeping it held will add more steering, but it hits a tipping point where you're now steering too much and hit the inside wall. Unless you release steering, where you're now immediately going arrow straight again and hit the outside wall. It's super frustrating. Graphics are terrible, character models are very blocky, the circuits are ugly, the frame rate is often jerky. It was bad enough that I found myself getting headaches from it. The game structure is a case of a championship with a minimum point requirement after each race. Fail to meet the points requirement and you can't progress. The difficulty seems very high, but that's probably more down to the terrible controls rather than being by design. There was a stamina mechanic requiring you to pick up energy packs, trickier than it should be again due to the controls. There was a jumping mechanic that again was trickier than it should be due to the controls. I've got nothing positive to say about this, it's a mess, give it a wide berth. So we've seen the best and worst, next we have what I consider the best surprise of the first block, and that is hover racing. As part of the challenge, I also included a selection of Net Your Oz games, and one of them was this little gem. Hover Racing is a futuristic racer of the F-Zero or Wipeout style, and a whole lot of fun. The graphics are decent and do a good job of portraying a futuristic aesthetic, and the music is very good too. The tracks are generally fun to play with long sweeping corners that suit the physics of the game, and the structure is fine too. There are 3 cups of 3 races each. You're required to win each race, and failing to win a race only has you restarting that race, rather than dumping you to the start of the cup. The controls are a little counterintuitive, but functional enough once you get used to them. In addition to standard steering inputs, there are strafe buttons and tilt buttons, meaning that often the most effective steering input requires 3 simultaneous button presses. It's confusing at first, but to be honest it didn't take too long for me to get comfortable with it. To summarise, this game was a great surprise, especially being a Net Your Oz title. I enjoyed it a lot. Next up, the biggest disappointment of the block, and that is Circuit Breakers. This is a game I owned as a child, and it absolutely did not live up to the nostalgia. And to be honest, it was great at first, but then the annoyances started showing up and they just kind of didn't stop. Graphically the game is decent, and the sound's fine too. The controls are a little flawed. Rather than having a full 360 degrees of movement, you're limited to a 16-point compass of directions, if that makes sense. I mean, this is great for the straights as it's easy to point your car forwards without having to make any micro corrections. However, when it comes to making fine movements, it's a problem. You often find yourself just playing on the limit between two directions to try and dodge an opponent or collect a pickup and just getting it wrong and falling off the map or failing to make your movement. Track design is often poor. You'll regularly find yourself going round a blind corner just to find yourself slapping straight into a wall or an obstacle. There's narrow meandering bridges, tight entryways, plenty of other annoyances, with a swinging, confusing camera too, muddying the waters further. You're allowed to stockpile as many weapons as you want, which is fine, but unfortunately, so can the AI cars. AI cars will also not use weapons against anyone other than you, meaning that they will indefinitely stockpile weapons until you get close, at which point they unleash hell. Additionally, AI will actively block you on the track too, the most egregious example being when I was brake checked just before a jump, causing me to fall into a ravine having lost all momentum. It's like racing against a team of 7 cars, rather than 7 individual opponents. The backmarkers are happy to sacrifice their own race just to troll you and protect the leader. Finally, the pace of the AI in the last tracks and all of the reverse tracks is very high. You need to run a near perfect race to win, and even then you're at the mercy of Lady Luck with their weaponry stockpiles. Get in the bin, circuit breakers. So we've covered the main categories I wanted to do. Let's also have a look at a few honourable mentions. First up, NASCAR Heat. The gameplay is fine, but I feel a championship of arcadey NASCAR generally isn't engaging enough. NASCAR Heat addresses this with an excellent scenario mode called Heat Mode. There's loads of fun scenarios to take on, but what I really liked was the presentation. Each scenario was introduced with a video presented either by the TV presenter of the time or actual NASCAR drivers. I thought that was great. Next up, we have a Japanese exclusive title, Shotoku Battle Gaiden Super Technic Challenge. This Japanese drift game had reasonable gameplay, but what really made it stand out again was the presentation between races. You'd basically go to track days and be challenged to races, drag races or drift competitions by other track visitors. These challenges were issued in a conversation format with photos of the people you're chatting to, which added a lot of life to the game, even though I did have to muddle through it with Google Lens. And finally, a dishonourable mention goes to Arthur Ready to Race. Look at the state of that. So there you have it. Thank you for watching my video, and a big thank you to everyone who's followed the challenge so far, whether that be over at Twitch on the streams or here on the challenge channel. I'll do another of these videos after game 100, so be sure to look out for it. Have a great day. Goodbye.